I still remember the cold look in my daughter's eyes when she handed me that piece of paper. 3 security guards stood behind her in my own living room, the room where I had read her bedtime stories and helped her with homework for 18 years. The paper was an eviction notice. My own daughter was throwing me out of the house I had worked 3 jobs to pay for. "You have 24 hours to pack your things and leave, Mom," Sarah said, her voice as sharp as broken glass. The diamond earrings she wore probably cost more than I made in a year. "This house belongs to me now. And I don't want you here anymore." My hands shook as I held the paper. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Just 3 days ago, Sarah had inherited $33 million from her grandmother. 3 days ago, she was still my sweet little girl who called me every morning to say good morning. Now, she stood in front of me like a stranger, like someone I had never met before. But what Sarah didn't know was that in exactly 3 days from that moment, she would be on her knees, tears streaming down her face, begging me to save her from the terrible mistake she was about to make. She didn't know that her new friends, the ones who convinced her to throw me out, had a plan that would destroy everything she held dear. And she definitely didn't know that I was the only person in the world who could stop them. The question was, after what she had done to me, would I even want to help her? Let me tell you how this all started, because sometimes the most painful betrayals come from the people we love the most. My name is Linda Martinez, and I'm 52 years old. For the past 20 years, I've been a single mother to Sarah. Her father left when she was just 2 years old, claiming he wasn't ready to be a dad. I never saw him again after that day, and honestly, I didn't want to. Sarah and I were better off without someone who could walk away from his own child so easily. I worked as a nurse at the local hospital during the day, cleaned offices at night, and did people's laundry on weekends. Some people might think that sounds terrible, but I was happy. Every dollar I earned went toward making sure Sarah had everything she needed: good clothes, school supplies, music lessons, soccer practice, summer camps. I wanted her to have all the opportunities I never had. Sarah was always special, not just because she was my daughter, but because she had this light inside her. She was kind to everyone, even the kids at school who others made fun of. She volunteered at the animal shelter every Saturday. She saved her allowance to buy Christmas presents for children whose families couldn't afford them. When I got sick with pneumonia one winter, 12-year-old Sarah made me soup and sat by my bed reading me stories until I felt better. "Mom, we're a team," she used to say. "It's you and me against the world." And we were a team, the best team I could have asked for. When Sarah turned 16, she got a part-time job at the local ice cream shop. She didn't have to work. I would have figured out a way to give her spending money, but she wanted to help. Half of every paycheck went into her college fund, and the other half went toward our monthly expenses. "I want to be a teacher, Mom," she told me one evening as we sat on our front porch, watching the sunset. "I want to help kids the way you helped me." I was so proud of her. Not just because she wanted to help others, but because despite all the struggles we had been through, she had grown up to be such a good person. Sarah's grandmother on her father's side, Margaret Thompson, was a mystery to us for most of Sarah's life. Margaret was incredibly wealthy. She owned several businesses and had more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. But she had never been part of our lives. When Sarah's father left, Margaret made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with us either. "We don't need her anyway," I told Sarah when she asked about her grandmother as a little girl. "We have each other, and that's all we need." But when Sarah turned 18 and graduated high school with honors, something unexpected happened. Margaret reached out. It started with a letter. A fancy letter on expensive paper that arrived on a Tuesday morning in May. Sarah had been accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship, but we were still struggling to figure out how to pay for the rest. I was considering taking out a second mortgage on our little house. The letter was addressed to Sarah, but she opened it in front of me at our kitchen table. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I know I have not been part of your life, and that was my choice. But you are my granddaughter, and I would like the opportunity to get to know you before it's too late." Margaret explained in the letter that she was 78 years old and not in good health. She said she had always wondered about Sarah and regretted not reaching out sooner. She invited Sarah to visit her at her mansion across town. Sarah looked at me with confusion in her eyes. "What do you think, Mom? Should I go?" I'll be honest, my first instinct was to say no. Margaret had ignored us for 18 years. Where was she when Sarah had chickenpox, and I had to take unpaid time off work to care for her? Where was she when Sarah needed help with school projects, and I was working 2 jobs? Where was she for all the birthdays, holidays, and important moments? But looking at my daughter's face, I could see she was curious about her grandmother, and I realized that keeping her away would be selfish. Sarah deserved the chance to know her father's family, even if they had never been there for her before. "If you want to meet her, sweetie, then you should," I said, taking her hand. "Just remember that people don't always turn out to be who we hope they'll be." Sarah smiled and squeezed my hand. "Don't worry, Mom. Nobody could ever replace you. You're the best mom in the world." The first visit to Margaret's house was like something out of a movie. The mansion had 20 rooms, a swimming pool, tennis court, and gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Margaret was a small, thin woman who dressed in expensive clothes and spoke in a quiet, careful voice. Sarah came home that evening full of excitement. "Mom, you should see her house. And she has so many pictures of Dad when he was little. She showed me his room, and it still looks exactly the same as when he was a teenager. And guess what? She wants to pay for my college." My heart did a little flip. Not because I didn't want help with college expenses, but because I worried about what strings might be attached to Margaret's generosity. "That's very kind of her, honey," I said carefully. "But remember what we always say about accepting big gifts from people." "I know, Mom. There's no such thing as a free lunch," Sarah recited our family motto. "But she seems really nice. She said she's sorry she wasn't there for me growing up, and she wants to make up for lost time." Over the next few months, Sarah visited Margaret every weekend. At first, I was happy to see them building a relationship. Sarah would come home with stories about Margaret's travels around the world, the charities she supported, and the business empire she had built from nothing. But slowly, I started to notice changes in my daughter. Sarah began to dress differently. Instead of the simple clothes we bought from discount stores, she started wearing expensive outfits that Margaret had bought for her. Her hair was always perfectly styled, and she started wearing makeup every day. "Grandmother says presentation is everything," Sarah explained when I asked about the changes. "She says if I want to be successful in life, I need to look the part." I tried not to let it bother me. After all, there was nothing wrong with nice clothes and good grooming, but it felt like my daughter was becoming someone I didn't recognize. The bigger changes started during Sarah's freshman year of college. Margaret had indeed paid for everything: tuition, room and board, books, even spending money. Sarah was studying education just like she had always planned, but she started talking about changing her major. "Grandmother thinks I should study business instead," Sarah told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "She says teaching doesn't pay well, and I should think about my future." "But you've always wanted to be a teacher, somewhere," I reminded her. "Remember how you used to line up your dolls and pretend to teach them math?" Sarah laughed, but it sounded different than her old laugh. "Oh, Mom, that was just a kid's dream. I need to be more realistic about what I want to do with my life." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Teaching wasn't just Sarah's dream, it was her calling. She had always been amazing with children. She was patient, kind, and had a way of explaining things that made even the most complicated ideas seem simple. The world needed teachers like Sarah. but I bit my tongue. Sarah was 18 years old enough to make her own decisions. And if Margaret's influence was helping her think about her future more seriously, maybe that wasn't entirely bad. The real problem started during Sarah's sophomore year. She came home for Thanksgiving with a group of new friends. Their names were Madison, Preston, and Blake. They drove expensive cars, wore designer clothes, and talked about money constantly. "These are my friends from the country club," Sarah announced as they walked into our little house. I could see them looking around with barely concealed disgust at our simple furniture and small rooms. Madison was a blonde girl who seemed to have never heard the word please in her life. She ordered me around like I was her personal servant. "Linda, could you bring us some sparkling water? And make sure it's in proper glasses, not plastic cups." Preston was a tall, skinny boy who bragged about his family's yacht and their vacation homes in 3 different states. He kept checking his expensive watch and sighing like he was bored. Blake was the worst of the 3. He was handsome in that polished, artificial way, and I could see that Sarah had a crush on him. But there was something cold about his smile, something that reminded me of a snake. "So Sarah tells us you work at a hospital," Blake said to me, but his tone made it sound like I cleaned toilets for a living. "That must be so fulfilling, helping people and all." I could hear the sarcasm in his voice, but I smiled politely. These were Sarah's friends, and I wanted to make a good impression. During that Thanksgiving weekend, I watched my daughter transform in front of my eyes. Around her new friends, she became someone I didn't know. She complained about our house, criticized the food I had spent 2 days preparing, and seemed embarrassed by everything about our life. The worst moment came on Friday evening. I had made Sarah's favorite dinner, homemade lasagna with garlic bread and a salad from vegetables I had grown in our little garden. It was the same meal we had shared hundreds of times before, and Sarah had always said it was better than anything she could get in a restaurant. But that night, she pushed her food around on her plate and wrinkled her nose. "Mom, this is so heavy," she complained. "At grandmother's house we have much lighter, more sophisticated food." Madison laughed. "Sarah, you're so funny. You act like you weren't raised on this kind of food." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and hurt. But what came next was even worse. "Well, I'm learning to appreciate finer things," Sarah said, not even looking at me. "Grandmother says I have naturally good taste. I just needed the right exposure." Blake reached over and put his hand on Sarah's arm. "Don't worry, babe. Once you inherit your grandmother's money, you'll be able to eat wherever you want for the rest of your life." The room went silent. Sarah's face turned red, and she glared at Blake. "Blake, we don't talk about that," she said quickly. But the damage was done. I realized that Sarah had been discussing Margaret's money with her friends, and they all knew about the inheritance that would someday come to her. That night, after Sarah's friends had gone back to their hotel, I tried to talk to her about what Blake had said. "Honey, I hope you're not spending time with these people just because they know about your grandmother's money," I said gently. Sarah's response shocked me. "God, Mom, why do you always have to be so suspicious of everyone? Maybe they like me because I'm interesting and fun to be around. Did you ever think of that?" "Of course you're interesting and fun," I said. "But Sarah, true friends don't care about how much money you have or might have someday." "You just don't understand," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "You've never had nice things or successful friends, and you don't know what it's like." I felt like she had slapped me across the face. All those years of working 3 jobs, sacrificing everything I had to give her a good life. And this was what she thought of me? "Sarah, I may not have a lot of money, but I know what real friendship looks like," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Real friends would love you even if you had nothing." "Whatever, Mom. You're just jealous because I finally have friends who understand me." She stormed off to her room and barely spoke to me for the rest of the weekend. When Sarah went back to college after Thanksgiving, I felt like I was losing her. Our weekly phone calls became shorter and less frequent. She stopped sharing details about her classes or her life. When I asked about her education major, she got irritated. I told you I'm switching to business. Grandmother and I have talked about it extensively, and it's the smart choice. I wanted to argue, to remind her of all the times she had talked about becoming a teacher, but I could hear in her voice that her mind was made up. Christmas that year was the loneliest I had ever experienced. Sarah spent the holiday at Margaret's house instead of coming home. She called me on Christmas morning, but the conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. I have to go, Mom. Grandmother is having a big party and I need to get ready. I miss you, sweetheart, I said. I wish you were here. I know, Mom, but this is important. I'll see you soon, okay? But soon never came. Sarah didn't come home for spring break either. She went on a cruise with Margaret and her new friends instead. I started to feel like a stranger in my daughter's life. The girl who used to call me every day to share the smallest details of her world now acted like talking to me was a chore. The final blow came at the end of Sarah's sophomore year. She called to tell me she was switching her major to business, just as she had threatened to do. But Sarah, I pleaded, you've always wanted to teach children. Remember how you used to say that teachers change the world one student at a time? Mom, that was childish thinking. I need to be practical about my future. Grandmother says I have real potential in business, and she's going to help me learn everything I need to know. What about what makes you happy? I asked. Money makes people happy, Mom. Financial security makes people happy. You should understand that better than anyone. I wanted to tell her that money wasn't what had made me happy all these years. What made me happy was watching her grow into a kind, caring person. What made me happy was our little traditions, like movie nights and cooking together. What made me happy was the relationship we used to have. But I could hear in her voice that she wouldn't understand anymore. Things continued to get worse during Sarah's junior year. She rarely came home, and when she did, she acted like our house was beneath her. She had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who cared more about appearances than about people. But I still loved her. She was still my daughter, still the little girl I had raised and protected and sacrificed for. I kept hoping that someday she would remember who she used to be. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in February, I got the phone call that changed everything. Margaret had died suddenly of a heart attack. I expected Sarah to be devastated. Despite everything, she had grown close to her grandmother over the past few years. But when I drove to Margaret's house to comfort my daughter, I found her in the lawyer's office with Madison, Preston, and Blake, discussing the will. Mom, you're not going to believe this, Sarah said, her eyes shining with excitement. Grandmother left me everything. The house, the businesses, the investments, all of it. $33 million. I should have been happy for her. This inheritance would set Sarah up for life, give her opportunities I could never have provided. But looking at her face, seeing the dollar signs practically glowing in her eyes, I felt a chill run down my spine. That's wonderful, honey, I said carefully. I'm sure she wanted you to be taken care of. Taken care of? Madison laughed. Sarah's going to be one of the richest people in town. Blake put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. We've been talking about all the things we can do now. Travel, buy new cars, maybe start our own business. We? I asked. Sarah's face flushed. Mom, Blake and I are together now, and Madison and Preston are my closest friends. They're going to help me figure out how to manage all this money. I felt alarm bells going off in my head. These people had never shown any interest in Sarah until they learned about her potential inheritance. Now that she actually had the money, they were practically glued to her side. Sarah, maybe you should take some time to think about this, I suggested. Big decisions shouldn't be made when you're grieving. I'm not grieving, Mom, Sarah said coldly. I'm excited about my future. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched my daughter spiral completely out of control. She dropped out of college 3 months before graduation, saying she didn't need a degree anymore. She started spending money like it was water, buying expensive cars, jewelry, and clothes. But the worst part was how she treated people. The sweet, kind girl I had raised was gone, replaced by someone who looked down on everyone she used to care about. She stopped volunteering at the animal shelter, saying it was beneath her now. She made cruel comments about our neighbors, people she had known her whole life. She even criticized me for continuing to work at the hospital. "Mom, you don't need to work anymore," she said. "I have more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. Why don't you quit your job and come work for me instead? I could use a personal assistant." The offer felt like an insult. I had been a nurse for 20 years. I loved my job, loved helping people, loved making a difference in the world. The idea of giving all that up to become my daughter's employee made me feel sick. "Thank you, sweetheart, but I love nursing. It's not just a job to me, it's my calling." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Whatever makes you happy, I guess. But it seems like such a waste of time when you could be doing so much more with your life." I realized that Sarah no longer understood the concept of finding fulfillment in helping others. Everything had become about money and status for her. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening in early March. I had invited Sarah over for dinner, hoping we could have some quality time together like we used to. I made all her favorite foods and set the table with our good dishes. But Sarah showed up 2 hours late with Madison, Preston, and Blake in tow. "Sorry we're late, Mom," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "We were looking at houses. I'm thinking about buying something bigger, maybe in the hills where all the successful people live." My heart sank. "You mean you're thinking about moving out of town?" "Well, yeah. This neighborhood is so middle class. I need to be around people who are more like me now." Madison looked around our living room with disgust. "Sarah, I can't believe you grew up here. It's so small and outdated." "I know, right?" Sarah laughed. "But I didn't know any better then." I felt like I was watching a stranger wearing my daughter's face. This wasn't the girl who used to help me plant flowers in our garden. This wasn't the girl who used to say our little house was perfect because it was full of love. During dinner, Sarah's friends made cutting remarks about everything from the food to the furniture. They talked about their plans to travel around Europe together, the expensive restaurants they wanted to try, the designer clothes they planned to buy. "We're thinking about starting an investment company," Blake announced. "Sarah's going to be our primary investor." "Sarah doesn't know anything about investments," I said before I could stop myself. Blake's smile turned cold. "That's what she has us for. We're going to teach her everything she needs to know." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I had a terrible feeling that these people were planning to take advantage of my daughter's inexperience and naivety. After they left that evening, I tried to talk to Sarah about my concerns. "Honey, I'm worried about your new friends," I said. "I think they might be more interested in your money than in you as a person." Sarah's reaction was explosive. "I am so sick of you being negative about everything," she shouted. "These are the first real friends I've ever had. And you just want to ruin it because you're jealous." "I'm not jealous, Sarah. I'm concerned. These people didn't care about you before you inherited money, and now they're suddenly your best friends? Doesn't that seem strange to you?" "No, it doesn't seem strange. It seems like they recognize my potential, which is more than you've ever done." I felt like she had stabbed me in the heart. "Sarah, I've always believed in your potential. I worked 3 jobs to make sure you had every opportunity possible." "Yeah, well, maybe if you had aimed higher, I would have had better opportunities sooner." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The daughter I had sacrificed everything for was now criticizing me for not giving her enough. "Sarah, I gave you everything I had," I said quietly. "And it wasn't enough!" she screamed. "Look at this house, Mom. Look at your job, your life. I don't want to end up like you, struggling just to pay bills and pretending like that's some kind of noble way to live. Her words cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. I had been proud of the life I had built for us. It might not have been luxurious, but it had been filled with love, hard work, and integrity. I had taught Sarah to value kindness over money, relationships over possessions. But looking at her now, I realized I had failed. My daughter had become everything I had tried to protect her from. "I think you should leave, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Fine," Sarah spat. "But don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize you were wrong about everything." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the pictures on the wall rattled. I didn't hear from Sarah for 3 weeks after that fight. I called her several times, but she never answered. I drove by Margaret's house where she was now living. But the gates were always closed and the security guards wouldn't let me in. I was heartbroken, but I was also angry. I had given this girl everything, and she had thrown it all back in my face. Maybe she needed to learn some hard lessons about life and about the people she had chosen to surround herself with. But I never expected what happened next. I never expected that on a quiet Thursday morning, 3 security guards would show up at my door with eviction papers, and my own daughter standing behind them, looking at me like I was a stranger she wanted to get rid of. That brings us back to where this story started. Back to that terrible moment when Sarah handed me those papers and told me I had 24 hours to pack my things and leave the house I had called home for 20 years. "You can't be serious," I said, staring at the eviction notice. "I'm completely serious," Sarah replied. "This house belongs to me now. I bought it from you yesterday. Well, technically, I had my lawyers handle the transaction. You'll find that the mortgage has been paid off, and you've been compensated fairly for your equity." I looked at the papers more carefully and saw a check clipped to the back. It was for $87,000, the approximate value of my half of the house after the mortgage was paid off. "Sarah, this is my home," I said, my voice shaking. "I raised you here. All our memories are here. And now, it's time for you to make new memories somewhere else," she said coldly. "I'm planning to renovate this place completely. Tear down walls, update everything. It's going to be unrecognizable when I'm done with it." I felt like she was talking about tearing down my entire life, not just remodeling a house. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. Sarah shrugged. "That's not my problem anymore. You're a grown woman with a job, and I'm sure you'll figure it out." Madison stepped forward with a cruel smile. "Don't worry, Linda. I'm sure there are lots of nice little apartments on the other side of town that would be perfect for someone in your situation." The way she said "your situation" made it sound like I was some kind of charity case. I wanted to remind her that I had been supporting myself and my daughter just fine for 20 years before any of them came along. But looking at Sarah's face, I realized there was no point in arguing. My daughter had made her choice. She had chosen money and these terrible people over the woman who had loved and raised her. "Fine," I said, standing up straighter. "I'll be out by tomorrow." I thought I saw a flicker of uncertainty in Sarah's eyes, but it disappeared so quickly I might have imagined it. "Good," she said. "The moving truck will be here tomorrow evening to take care of any furniture I want to keep." As they turned to leave, Blake paused at the door. "Oh, and Linda?" he called back to me. "Don't think about trying to contact Sarah anymore. She's got important decisions to make about her future, and she doesn't need any negative influences holding her back." The security guards followed them out, leaving me alone in the house that was no longer mine. I spent that night packing my clothes and personal belongings into boxes. 20 years of life in this house, and it all fit into the back of my small car. As I worked, I found myself remembering all the good times Sarah and I had shared here. Her first steps in the hallway, birthday parties in the backyard, homework sessions at the kitchen table, movie nights on the old couch. By morning, I was exhausted and heartbroken, but I was also something else, determined. My daughter might have thrown me out, but I wasn't going to let these people destroy her life without a fight. I found a small apartment across town and used some of the money from the house sale to cover the first few months of rent. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with thin walls and old appliances, but it was clean and safe. On my second day in the new apartment, I ran into my old neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She was shocked to hear about what had happened. "I can't believe Sarah would do such a thing," she said, shaking her head. "That girl used to help me carry my groceries and shovel my driveway every winter." "People change," I said sadly. "Not that much," Mrs. Patterson insisted. "Something's not right about this whole situation. Those friends of hers have been coming and going from Margaret's house at all hours, and I've seen some very official-looking people there too. Lawyers, businessmen. It doesn't look like the kind of company a 20-year-old should be keeping." Mrs. Patterson's words stuck with me. That evening, I decided to drive by Margaret's house just to see what was happening. I parked across the street and watched as expensive cars came and went. I recognized Madison's red sports car and Preston's black SUV. But there were other vehicles too. Older men in expensive suits who looked like they meant business. I was about to leave when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Blake was standing in the front yard, talking on his phone, and I could hear pieces of his conversation through the open car window. "Stupid girl doesn't suspect anything. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late. All that money, and she just hands over control like it's nothing." I couldn't hear everything he was saying, but I heard enough to know that my worst fears were coming true. Blake and the others were planning something that would hurt Sarah, and she had no idea what was coming. For a moment, I considered driving up to the house and trying to warn her, but I knew she wouldn't listen to me. She had made it clear that she didn't want me in her life anymore. So I drove home to my little apartment and tried to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to let Sarah learn her lesson the hard way. She had chosen these people over me, so maybe she deserved whatever was coming to her. But as I lay in bed that night, I kept thinking about the little girl who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms. I thought about the teenager who had worked part-time to help with our expenses. I thought about all the times she had told me I was the best mom in the world. That girl was still inside Sarah somewhere, buried under all the greed and influence of her new friends. And whether she wanted my help or not, I couldn't just stand by and watch these people destroy her. I decided to do some investigating on my own. I used my computer at the hospital to research Blake, Madison, and Preston. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Blake had been involved in 2 previous investment scams that had stolen money from wealthy older women. Madison's family had declared bankruptcy 3 years ago, despite their expensive lifestyle. Preston had been arrested twice for fraud, though the charges had been dropped both times. These people were professional con artists, and Sarah was their latest target. I printed out all the information I had found and put it in a folder. Then I wrote Sarah a long letter explaining everything and begged her to be careful. I mailed the letter to Margaret's house, hoping she would at least read it before throwing it away. But the letter came back to me 3 days later, marked "Return to Sender" in Sarah's handwriting. She hadn't even opened it. I realized that I was completely powerless to help my daughter. She had cut me out of her life so completely that I couldn't even warn her about the danger she was in. All I could do was wait and hope that when the truth finally came out, Sarah would remember that no matter what had happened between us, I still loved her and would always be there for her. I didn't have to wait long. Exactly 3 days after Sarah had thrown me out of my house, my phone rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was sleeping poorly in my new apartment, so I was awake when the call came in. The number on my phone was Sarah's, but when I answered, all I could hear was sobbing. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was broken, desperate, terrified. "Mom, I need help. I need you to come get me right now. Please, I'm so scared." "Sarah, what's wrong? Where are you?" "I'm at grandmother's house, but they're all here and they won't let me leave. Mom, they've taken everything. All the money, the businesses, everything. And they're saying if I don't sign more papers, they're going to hurt me." My heart was pounding as I grabbed my car keys. "I'm on my way, sweetheart. Stay on the phone with me." "I can't," she whispered. "They're coming back. Mom, I'm sorry about everything. You were right about all of it, and I was so stupid. Please don't let them hurt me." The line went dead. I drove to Margaret's house faster than I had ever driven in my life, my mind racing with fear for my daughter. Whatever had happened, whatever Sarah had done to me, she was still my baby, and she needed my help. But as I pulled up to the mansion, I realized that getting Sarah out of this mess was going to be much more complicated than I had imagined. The house was dark, except for one light glowing in the upstairs window. That was Margaret's old bedroom, where Sarah had been staying since the inheritance. I could see shadows moving around inside, more than one person. My heart started beating even faster. I parked across the street and tried to think. If I just walked up to the front door, Blake and his friends might not let me in. Worse, they might hurt Sarah before I could get to her. I needed a different plan. That's when I remembered something. When Sarah was little, maybe 8 or 9 years old, she had gotten locked out of the house one afternoon while I was at work. Instead of waiting for me to come home, she had climbed the big oak tree in the backyard and gotten in through the upstairs bathroom window. I had been so scared when I found out, but Sarah had been proud of herself for being so clever. The same oak tree was still there, and it still reached up to that bathroom window. I'm 52 years old, and I haven't climbed a tree since I was probably 10. But when your child is in danger, you find strength you didn't know you had. I made my way around to the back of the property, staying in the shadows so no one would see me. The tree was bigger than I remembered, and the first branch was higher off the ground than it used to be. Or maybe I was just shorter than I used to be. I had to jump 3 times before I could grab hold of the lowest branch, and then I had to pull myself up with all the strength I could find. Climbing that tree in the dark was one of the scariest things I've ever done. Every branch seemed ready to break under my weight. Every sound I made seemed loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. But I kept thinking about Sarah's terrified voice on the phone, and I kept climbing. When I finally reached the bathroom window, I was relieved to find it unlocked. I guess some things never change. I pushed it open as quietly as I could and crawled inside, trying not to think about how far I would fall if I slipped. The house was eerily quiet once I got inside. I could hear voices coming from downstairs, but they were too far away for me to make out the words. I crept down the hallway toward Margaret's old bedroom, where I had seen the light from outside. The door was slightly open, and I could see Sarah sitting on the bed. She looked terrible. Her hair was messy, her makeup was smeared from crying, and she was still wearing the same clothes from earlier that day. But what scared me most was the look on her face. She looked lost, frightened, like a little girl who had just realized she was in more trouble than she could handle. Standing around the room were Blake, Madison, and Preston, along with the 2 older men I didn't recognize. One was tall and thin with gray hair, wearing an expensive suit. The other was shorter and stockier, with mean-looking eyes and hands that looked like they had seen some rough work. Blake was holding a stack of papers and talking to Sarah in a voice that sounded friendly, but felt threatening. "Come on, Sarah, this is just a formality," he was saying. "You trust us, right? We're your friends. We would never do anything to hurt you." "But I don't understand what these papers say," Sarah replied, her voice shaking. "They're full of legal words I don't know. Maybe I should have a lawyer look at them first." The gray-haired man laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. "Sarah, dear, we are lawyers. We're here to protect your interests. These documents are just to make sure your investments are properly managed." "What investments?" Sarah asked. "I thought the money was just sitting in the bank." Madison sat down next to Sarah on the bed and put an arm around her shoulders. But instead of being comforting, The gesture looked possessive, like Madison was making sure Sarah couldn't get up and leave. Sweetie, you can't just leave $33 million sitting in a bank account, Madison said, in a voice like she was talking to a small child. Money needs to work for you. It needs to grow. That's what rich people do. But what if I lose it all? Sarah asked. Preston laughed from where he was standing by the door. You're not going to lose it all, Sarah. You're going to make it bigger, much bigger. But you have to trust us and sign these papers tonight. I could see that Sarah was confused and scared, but she was also trying to act like she understood what was happening. That was always one of Sarah's problems. She hated admitting when she didn't know something, especially in front of people she wanted to impress. Why does it have to be tonight? She asked. Why can't we wait until tomorrow when I'm thinking more clearly? The stocky man with the mean eyes stepped forward for the first time. When he spoke, his voice was rough and intimidating. Because tomorrow might be too late, he said. The market waits for no one. You sign tonight, or you miss the biggest opportunity of your life. I could see Sarah shrinking back from him, but Blake quickly stepped between them. What Tony means, Blake said, shooting the other man a warning look, is that this is a time-sensitive opportunity. The people we're investing with are only taking new partners for a limited time. Sarah looked around the room at all the faces staring at her, waiting for her to sign papers she didn't understand. I could see her starting to panic. I want to call my mom, she said suddenly. The room went completely silent. Madison's arm tightened around Sarah's shoulders. Why would you want to call her? Madison asked. I thought you said she doesn't understand business. She doesn't, Sarah said quickly, but she's good at reading legal stuff. She has to deal with a lot of paperwork at the hospital. Blake sat down on Sarah's other side, trapping her between him and Madison. Sarah, remember what we talked about? He said softly. Your mom is part of your old life, the life where you were struggling and unhappy. We're your new life, the life where you're successful and wealthy and surrounded by people who really understand you. I watched my daughter's face as Blake spoke. For just a moment, I saw doubt in her eyes, like she was starting to realize something was wrong. But then Blake reached over and took her hand. I love you, Sarah, he said, looking directly into her eyes. I love you, and I want what's best for you. Would I ever do anything to hurt the woman I love? Sarah's expression softened. She was still just a 20-year-old girl, and she wanted to believe that this handsome, charming guy really loved her. She wanted to believe that these people really cared about her. No, she whispered. You wouldn't hurt me. That's right, Blake said, stroking her hand. So trust me, sign the papers, and tomorrow we'll start our new life together. We'll travel the world, buy a house in Paris, maybe get married on a beach somewhere exotic. I watched Sarah's face light up at the mention of marriage and travel. Blake was telling her everything a young girl dreams of hearing. But I also noticed that the gray-haired man and Tony were exchanging looks. They weren't smiling like Blake was. They looked impatient, like they were ready to move to more aggressive tactics if Sarah didn't cooperate soon. Sarah reached for the pen that Blake was holding out to her. That's when I decided I had to act. I pushed the bedroom door open and stepped into the room. Don't sign anything, Sarah, I said firmly. Everyone in the room spun around to look at me. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. Then Blake jumped up from the bed. What the hell are you doing here? He demanded. I'm here because my daughter called me for help, I said, looking directly at Sarah. And I will always come when my child needs me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I'm so sorry about everything. I was wrong about you, wrong about them, wrong about everything. I know, baby, I said gently. But we can talk about that later. Right now, you need to get away from these people. Blake stepped between Sarah and me. She's not going anywhere. Sarah made her choice. She chose us over you, remember? Actually, I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out the folder I had prepared days earlier. I think Sarah should know exactly who she's been trusting with her future. I opened the folder and started reading from the papers inside. Blake Morrison, arrested twice for fraud, suspected of running investment scams targeting wealthy women. Madison Wells, her family filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago, despite maintaining an expensive lifestyle through credit card fraud. Preston Hayes, currently under investigation for embezzling money from his last 3 employers. As I read, I watched the color drain from Sarah's face. Blake lunged forward and tried to grab the papers from my hands, but I stepped back. And these 2 gentlemen, I continued, pointing to the older men, are not lawyers. They're enforcers, people who specialize in making sure that victims of financial crimes don't cause trouble for their employers. Tony, the stocky man, reached inside his jacket. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might be reaching for a weapon, but instead he pulled out his phone. "We've got a problem," he said into the phone. "The Mark's mother showed up and she knows too much." I heard a voice on the other end of the phone, but I couldn't make out the words. Tony listened for a moment, then looked at the gray-haired man. "Boss says to clean this up, make it look like an accident." That's when I realized we were in much more danger than I had thought. These people weren't just con artists trying to steal Sarah's money. They were criminals who were willing to hurt people to protect their scheme. Sarah must have realized it too, because she suddenly jumped up from the bed. "We have to get out of here, Mom," she said, grabbing my hand. But Madison grabbed Sarah's other arm. "You're not going anywhere until you sign those papers." "Let go of me!" Sarah struggled, but Madison held tight. Blake moved to block the doorway. "Nobody's leaving this room until we finish our business." I looked around quickly, trying to find another way out. The window was too high to jump from safely. The only door was blocked by Blake. We were trapped. That's when I remembered something my father had taught me when I was Sarah's age. When you're in real danger, sometimes you have to do something unexpected to create an opportunity to escape. I walked over to the bed and picked up the papers that Blake had been trying to get Sarah to sign. Without hesitation, I tore them in half. "These papers are worthless now," I announced. "Sarah can't sign something that doesn't exist." Blake's face turned red with rage. "You have no idea what you just did." "I know exactly what I did," I said calmly. "I protected my daughter from making the biggest mistake of her life." The gray-haired man stepped forward, and for the first time he looked truly dangerous. "That was very foolish," he said quietly. "Those papers represented a lot of money for a lot of people, money they were counting on." "Then they'll have to find another way to steal it," I replied. Tony started moving toward me, but Sarah suddenly broke free from Madison's grip. "Stop!" Sarah shouted. "Everyone just stop!" She ran to the nightstand and picked up Margaret's old rotary phone. "I'm calling the police," she announced, starting to dial. Blake dove across the room and grabbed the phone cord, yanking it out of the wall. "No one's calling anyone." But Sarah's action had created the distraction I needed. While everyone was focused on her, I moved toward the door. "Sarah, come on!" I called. She ran toward me, but Blake caught her around the waist. "Let her go," I demanded. "Not until she signs new papers," Blake said, tightening his grip on Sarah. That's when Sarah did something that made me proud of the strong young woman I had raised. Instead of struggling or crying, she suddenly went completely limp in Blake's arms, making herself dead weight. Blake, who wasn't expecting her to do that, lost his balance and stumbled backward. Sarah twisted free and ran to me. Together, we pushed past Blake and ran out of the bedroom. Behind us, I could hear shouting and the sound of feet running after us. We ran down the long hallway toward the main staircase. I could hear Blake and the others right behind us, getting closer with every step. "This way," Sarah gasped, pulling me toward a different staircase, the servants' stairs that led directly to the kitchen. We ran down the narrow stairs as fast as we could, but I could hear our pursuers getting closer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. We burst through the kitchen door and ran toward the back of the house. I was hoping we could get outside and into my car before they caught us. But as we reached the back door, Tony appeared from the other direction, blocking our exit. He was breathing hard, but he was smiling. "Going somewhere?" he asked. Sarah and I stopped running and looked around desperately. We were trapped again, this time in the kitchen with Tony in front of us and Blake and the others coming up behind us. "There's nowhere to run," Blake said as he appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Sarah, this has gone far enough. You're going to come back upstairs and sign those papers, and your mother is going to forget everything she saw here tonight." "And if we refuse?" I asked. The gray-haired man stepped into the kitchen behind Blake. "Then you'll both be very sorry." I reached for Sarah's hand and squeezed it tight. We might not have many options left, but I was not going to let these people hurt my daughter without a fight. That's when we heard the sirens. At first, it was just a distant sound, like traffic or an airplane. But it got louder and closer, until there was no mistaking what it was. Police sirens, and they were coming toward the house. Blake's face went white. "How did they—" "I called them," Sarah said. And for the first time since I had arrived, she was smiling. "When?" Blake demanded. "You didn't have time to call anyone." Sarah held up Margaret's old cell phone, the one she kept in the kitchen for emergencies. "While you were all chasing us down the stairs," she said, "I pressed redial. The last number grandmother called was 911, the night she had her heart attack." The sirens were getting louder, and now we could see flashing lights through the kitchen windows. Blake looked at Tony and the gray-haired man. "We have to go now." "What about the money?" Tony demanded. "Forget the money," Blake snapped. "If the cops catch us here with them, we're all going to prison." The three men ran toward the front of the house, probably hoping to escape before the police surrounded the building. Madison and Preston had disappeared somewhere along the way. Sarah and I heard the front door slam, then the sound of car engines starting and tires squealing as Blake and his friends tried to get away. A moment later, police officers were pounding on the back door. "This is the police! Open up!" Sarah ran to unlock the door, and suddenly the kitchen was full of uniformed officers. "Are you all right?" the first officer asked. "We got a 911 call from this address." "We're okay now," Sarah said. And then she started crying. I put my arms around my daughter and held her tight as she sobbed against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I'm sorry about everything. You were right about all of it, and I was such a fool." "It's okay, baby," I whispered back. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." But as I held Sarah and talked to the police officers, I knew that this was far from over. Blake and his friends might have escaped tonight, but they had been planning to steal $33 million. People don't just walk away from that kind of money. They would be back. And next time, they wouldn't underestimate us. As the police took our statements and searched the house for evidence, I realized that the real fight was just beginning. The next morning came too quickly. Sarah and I had spent the rest of the night at the police station, giving detailed statements about everything that had happened. By the time we were finally allowed to leave, the sun was already rising over the city. Sarah looked exhausted as we sat in my car in the police station parking lot. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled, her makeup was completely gone, and her hair was a mess. But for the first time in months, she looked like my daughter again. "Mom, I don't know how to begin apologizing for everything I've done," she said, staring down at her hands. "I threw you out of your own house. I said terrible things to you. I chose those awful people over the one person who has always loved me." I reached over and took her hand. "Sarah, we all make mistakes. What matters is that you realize the truth before it was too late." "But what if it is too late?" Sarah asked, tears starting to flow again. "The police said Blake and his friends got away. What if they come back? What if they try to hurt you because of what happened tonight?" I had been wondering the same thing, but I didn't want Sarah to see how worried I was. "The important thing is that they didn't get your money," I said. "And now the police know who they are and what they were trying to do." Detective Morrison, the officer who had taken our statements, knocked on my car window. I rolled it down to hear what he had to say. "Ladies, I wanted to give you an update before you left," he said. "We caught 2 of the suspects trying to leave town. Blake Morrison and the man you knew as Tony are now in custody." Sarah sat up straighter. "What about the others?" "Madison Wells, Preston Hayes, and the older gentleman are still at large, but we have their names and descriptions. We'll find them." "Are Sarah and I safe?" I asked. Detective Morrison hesitated for just a moment, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "We're going to have patrol cars drive by both of your addresses regularly," he said. "And I would recommend that you both stay somewhere else for a few days, just to be safe." After the detective walked away, Sarah turned to me with fresh tears in her eyes. "Mom, I don't have anywhere else to go. I burned on all my bridges when I chose Blake and his friends over everyone who really cared about me." "You have me," I said firmly. "You'll always have me. But you live in that tiny apartment now because I threw you out of our house. There's barely room for one person, let alone 2. I thought about my little one-bedroom apartment with its thin walls and old furniture. Sarah was right, it wasn't much. But it was home. And more importantly, it was where we could be together." "We'll make it work," I said. "Remember when you were little and we used to have sleepovers in the living room? We'll pretend it's just a really long sleepover." For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Sarah smiled a real smile. We drove to Margaret's house so Sarah could pack some clothes and personal items. The police had already been through the house, collecting evidence, but they said Sarah could take whatever she needed. Walking through that huge mansion, I was struck by how empty and cold it felt. All the expensive furniture and fancy decorations couldn't make it feel like a home. It was just a house full of things that meant nothing. Sarah seemed to feel it too. "I can't believe I thought this place was better than our real home," she said, as we walked through the grand living room. "Money can buy a lot of things," I said, "but it can't buy the things that really matter. Love, family, genuine friendship. Those things have to be earned." While Sarah packed her clothes, I looked around Margaret's home office. The police had taken most of the papers as evidence, but there were still some documents scattered around. Bank statements, investment portfolios, legal papers I didn't understand. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Among the scattered papers was a document titled Power of Attorney. It was dated just 3 days ago, the day after Sarah had thrown me out of the house. According to the document, Sarah had given Blake Morrison complete control over all of her finances. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice shaking. "You need to see this!" She came running down the stairs with a suitcase in her hand. "What is it, Mom?" I held up the power of attorney document. "Did you sign this?" Sarah took the paper and read it, her face growing paler with each word. I think so," she whispered. "Blake said it was just paperwork to set up the investment accounts. He said it was normal, that all wealthy people had to sign papers like this." My heart sank. This was worse than I had thought. If Sarah had given Blake power of attorney, he might have already moved her money before the police caught him. "We need to call the bank right now," I said. Sarah's hands were shaking as she dialed the number for Margaret's private banker. I could only hear one side of the conversation, but Sarah's face told me everything I needed to know. "What do you mean the accounts are empty?" Sarah said into the phone. "That's impossible. There should be $33 million. There was a long pause while the banker explained something. "But I didn't authorize any transfers," Sarah said, her voice rising with panic. "I never told anyone they could move my money." Another pause. A power of attorney, but I only signed that 3 days ago. How could they have moved everything so quickly? I could see Sarah starting to panic, so I gently took the phone from her. This is Linda Martinez, Sarah's mother, I said to the banker. Can you please explain exactly what happened to my daughter's money? The banker, a man named Mr. Henderson, spoke in a calm, professional voice that somehow made the terrible news sound even worse. Mrs. Martinez, I'm afraid that 3 days ago, Mr. Blake Morrison came to the bank with a signed power of attorney document and instructions to transfer all of Ms. Thompson's funds to various investment accounts. What kind of investment accounts? I asked. Offshore accounts, primarily. The Cayman Islands, Switzerland, places where it's very difficult to trace or recover funds once they've been transferred. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. How much money are we talking about? The total amount transferred was $32.7 million. Ms. Thompson was left with just enough in her checking account to cover basic expenses for a few weeks. I looked at Sarah, who was sitting on the floor with her head in her hands, crying. Mr. Henderson, is there any way to get this money back? I'm afraid not, Mrs. Martinez. The power of attorney document was properly notarized and legally binding. From the bank's perspective, Mr. Morrison was acting with Ms. Thompson's full authority. After I hung up the phone, Sarah and I sat in silence for several minutes. Everything she had inherited, everything Margaret had worked her whole life to build, was gone. I've lost everything, haven't I? Sarah finally said. No, sweetheart, you've lost money. Money can be earned again. You haven't lost the things that really matter. Like what? Sarah asked bitterly. I don't have a job. I don't have a college degree. I don't have any real skills. I dropped out of school to play rich girl, and now I have nothing to show for it. You have your intelligence, your kindness, your ability to learn and grow. You have people who love you. You have a second chance to build a life based on what really matters, instead of what looks impressive to other people. Sarah looked at me with red, swollen eyes. How can you not hate me, Mom? I threw you out of your own house. I chose those criminals over you. I lost every penny of grandmother's money because I was too stupid and greedy to see what was really happening. I sat down on the floor next to Sarah and put my arm around her shoulders. Sarah, do you remember when you were 7 years old and you broke my grandmother's china vase? The one that was the only thing I had left from my own mother? Sarah nodded. I was playing ball in the house even though you told me not to. And what did I do when I found the broken pieces? You hugged me and told me that you were just glad I wasn't hurt. That's right. Because I learned something that day that took me years to understand. Things can be replaced, but people can't. That vase was important to me because it reminded me of my mother. But you are my daughter. You are irreplaceable. Sarah started crying again, but this time they were different tears. Not tears of panic or regret, but tears of relief and gratitude. I love you so much, Mom. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for what I've done. You don't need to make up for anything, I said. You just need to learn from it and be better going forward. We spent the next hour going through Margaret's house, gathering anything that might be important or meaningful. Sarah found photo albums full of pictures of her father as a child, along with letters he had written to his mother from college. She also found Margaret's jewelry, which the bank had said wasn't part of the financial accounts that Blake had emptied. At least he didn't get everything, Sarah said, holding up a simple gold necklace that had belonged to Margaret's mother. As we were getting ready to leave, Detective Morrison called with another update. I have good news and bad news, he said when I answered the phone. Give me the good news first. We caught Madison Wells trying to board a flight to Mexico. She had $50,000 in cash and a fake passport. And the bad news? She's not talking. Neither is Blake Morrison. And Preston Hayes and the older gentleman have completely disappeared. We think they may have left the country. What about Sarah's money? That's going to be much harder. The money was transferred to accounts in countries that don't cooperate with American law enforcement. It could take years to get any of it back, if we ever do. After I hung up, I could see that Sarah had overheard enough of the conversation to understand what it meant. "The money's really gone, isn't it?" she said. "It looks that way." Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring out the window of Margaret's grand living room. "You know what's strange?" she finally said. "I thought losing all that money would be the worst thing that could happen to me. But right now, sitting here with you, I feel more hopeful than I have in months." "Why is that?" I asked. "Because for the first time since grandmother died, I feel like myself again. Not the fake person I was trying to be for Blake and his friends, but the real me, the me you raised." We loaded Sarah's belongings into my small car and drove back to my apartment. It was a tight fit, both the belongings and the two of us in that tiny space. But somehow, it felt right. That evening, as we sat on my old couch sharing a simple dinner of soup and sandwiches, Sarah made an announcement. "I'm going back to school," she said. I'm going to finish my education degree just like I always planned. And I'm going to become the best teacher I can be." "That's wonderful, honey, but school costs money and we don't have much right now." Sarah smiled, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, it was the smile I remembered from when she was younger. "Then I'll work my way through school, just like you worked to support us when I was growing up. I'll get student loans, work part-time jobs, do whatever it takes. I'm not afraid of hard work anymore." Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I settled into our new life together. She got a job at a local coffee shop, working early morning shifts before her classes. She had re-enrolled at the university and was determined to graduate with honors. I watched my daughter transform back into the person I had always known she could be. She was kind to her coworkers, patient with difficult customers, and grateful for every opportunity she had to learn and grow. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple outfits from discount stores. The fancy jewelry was sold to help pay for textbooks. The entitled attitude had disappeared completely, replaced by humility and hard work. But the most important change was in how Sarah treated other people. She volunteered at the animal shelter again on weekends. She tutored younger students who were struggling with their classes. She helped elderly neighbors with their groceries and yard work. "I forgot how good it feels to help people, Them," she told me one evening as we sat on our tiny apartment balcony, watching the sunset. "All those months of focusing on money and status, I lost sight of what really makes life meaningful." 3 months after the night that changed everything, Detective Morrison called with news about the case. "Blake Morrison and Madison Wells both pleaded guilty to fraud and theft charges," he said. "They'll be spending the next 10 to 15 years in prison." "What about Sarah's money?" I asked. "We managed to recover about $2 million from accounts they hadn't had time to fully hide. It's not everything, but it's something." When I told Sarah about the recovered money, her reaction surprised me. "I want to use it to start a scholarship fund," she said, "for students who want to become teachers but can't afford college. Students like me who need a second chance to pursue their real dreams." "Are you sure? That money could help you finish school without working so many hours." "Mom, I've learned that the best way to honor a second chance is to give someone else a first chance. Besides, I like working for what I want. It makes everything I achieve feel more meaningful." 6 months later, Sarah graduated summa cum laude with her teaching degree. I was in the front row at the graduation ceremony, crying tears of pride as my daughter walked across the stage. After the ceremony, Sarah came running over to me, her diploma in her hand and the biggest smile I had ever seen on her face. "We did it, Mom," she said, hugging me tight. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You did this yourself, sweetheart. I just reminded you of who you really are." That fall, Sarah started her first teaching job at an elementary school in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. Her students loved her, and she loved them right back. She had found her calling again, and watching her with those children, I knew that losing Margaret's money had been the best thing that could have happened to her. On the anniversary of the night that Blake and his friends had tried to steal Sarah's inheritance, we sat on our apartment balcony again, sharing a simple dinner and watching the sunset. "Do you ever regret what happened?" I asked Sarah. She thought about it for a moment before answering. "I regret the way I treated you. I regret the time I wasted trying to be someone I'm not. But I don't regret losing the money, if that's what you mean." "Why not?" "Because losing that money saved my life. If Blake hadn't tried to steal it, I might have spent years becoming more and more like the person I was turning into. Selfish, cruel, empty. I might have lost you forever." "You could never lose me forever," I said. "I'm your mother. That's a job that doesn't end when things get difficult." Sarah reached over and took my hand. I know that now. And I also know that the richest person isn't the one with the most money. The richest person is the one with the most love in their life. And by that measure, I'm the richest person in the world." As we sat there watching the sun set over our simple but happy life, I realized that Sarah was right. We had lost $33 million, but we had gained something much more valuable. We had found each other again. Sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as the greatest losses. Sometimes being thrown out is really being set free. And sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up saving you instead. My daughter got $33 million and threw me out. 3 days later, she was begging for my help. But in the end, we both discovered that the help we really needed wasn't protection from criminals or recovery of stolen money. The help we needed was remembering that love, family, and second chances are worth more than all the money in the world. And that's a lesson that no one can ever steal from us. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.